Good afternoon. Today we've got Mary Kim Raybon from the Beasley Allen firm. Mary Kim, would you just give us a little bit of your background, your legal education, and your professional experience?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Forrest. This is great. And I think this particular issue that we're going to talk about is incredibly relevant today. And so I think it will be good to kind of inform potential clients and some of your clientele about this. But my legal background, I did not grow up thinking I wanted to be a lawyer, even though my parents say that I did. But it really wasn't until college that I realized that going to law school was kind of what I wanted to do. And so I went to law school after college and I graduated from Cumberland School of Law, which is a part of Samford University up in Birmingham. And I graduated in 2020 and I took the bar and thankfully passed it the same year. And as far as my professional experience, drug and device cases are what I do and all I do. During my time at Beasley Allen thus far, I have already successfully litigated cases that involve high viscosity bone cements, which is a product that surrounds the knee when a new total knee replacement is inserted. And I've also dealt with some diet drug litigation, including drugs like Belviq. And those cases were kind of coordinated informally across multiple state and federal courts. And so what I got to learn in those cases was the very start of the litigation to the very end. I've handled everything from case intake all the way to administering settlements. And then as of lately, my main part of practice is handling the Ozempic or GLP-1 litigation that we'll discuss, as well as some other pharmaceutical drugs and dietary supplement cases. And so even though I have only been a lawyer for about 4 years, almost 5 years at this point, I've been able to, this is my bread and butter, and I've been able to kind of see the very beginning to the very end of these cases, thankfully.
Well, you certainly jumped into the deep end of the pool right away on your legal career. So that's very impressive because I know that with this type of litigation, MDLs, it's factually, scientifically, and legally very complicated. So that's very impressive. So today we're going to be talking about Ozempic. Can you just tell us what Ozempic is and what it's used for?
Sure. So Ozempic is a part of a class of drugs that are called GLP-1. They're I always want to say litigations, but they're medications. And that stands for glucagon-like peptide. It's actually interesting because they conducted several years ago some animal studies that showed, I don't know if you're familiar with what a Gila monster is, but apparently a Gila monster, they noticed that it secretes GLP-1 at a much higher rate than humans do. And so somehow one thing led to another, and scientists realized that it can help you lower your A1C level in humans, and it can also slow and suppress your appetite, which is probably for weight loss, which is now probably the more common use for it. And then you also have, some different names of same GLP-1 medications. You usually hear also semaglutide or semaglutide. Those are also within the class of GLP-1 medications. That's just kind of the chemical compound that makes up these medications. And tirzepatide is another one, which usually goes by the name brand of Mounjaro. So that's kind of a general overview of what those drugs are and what they typically do.
So am I correct? Say, for example, Ozempic was first put on the market to treat diabetes.
You're exactly right. Yes. And they haven't been on the market for terribly long. Ozempic was the first to be approved, and it was just approved in 2017, which we can talk about a little bit later, but I think that is very important to note because that shows how new these drugs are and how injuries are still going to be accruing, injuries that we may not know about yet, and that we have yet to figure out and that science has yet to develop on. So these are very new drugs. And I will say, usually the FDA incentivizes manufacturers to come up with weight loss drugs. Now this again was not approved and necessarily marketed at first as a weight loss drug. It was for type 2 diabetes, but the FDA incentivizes drugs to become weight loss drugs based on just the obesity epidemic in our country.
Well, you mentioned injuries. What are some of the injuries that you see with Ozempic use?
Sure. So as we mentioned earlier, kind of the way that Ozempic and other GLP-1 medications work is that it acts to slow down the digestion in the body. This keeps you fuller longer, obviously. And so what has happened though, is that the stomach is being slowed down so much that it basically can become paralyzed. And it can lead to a multitude of issues. And then Ozempic can also, in some patients, cause the opposite. It can cause cyclical vomiting that requires an ER visit, excessive diarrhea, things that are so severe that you have to be hospitalized for them, as well as some gallbladder issues. We've seen a lot of gallbladder removal cases, and just kind of a myriad of other GI issues that require some form of either treatment or surgical intervention. Perhaps one of the scariest potential side effects, though, of Ozempic, and that we have seen and confirmed in patients, is that the manufacturer is not properly warning for patients that undergo anesthesia for surgery. You are supposed to not have any GLP-1 medication in your system for at least a week before your surgery. And before they were properly warning for that, there was the issue of people undergoing surgery and still having food in their stomach, which you're not supposed to have when you undergo anesthesia. And sadly, some people are choking to death and aspirating on an operating table. And so those are probably the most severe of the injuries because they can, in fact, result in death. But we've also seen some other GI complications that also one thing leads to another, then leads to another, and it causes their death as well. So you really have a wide variety of injuries that we're looking at here with Ozempic.
I know you're probably early on with this project, but have there been any lawsuits filed yet over Ozempic?
Yes, there have been several lawsuits filed. And at the time that the petition was filed for these cases to become a multi-district litigation, which I'll call an MDL for all purposes, there were already about 44 or 45 cases that were filed within a pretty short, relatively short period of time. And since then, that number has only grown. These cases are out there and they're being filed. And like I said earlier, some of these injuries are still latent. They have yet to happen, and they certainly will be happening in the future.
Where's the MDL located?
The MDL was recently just consolidated in front of Judge Jean Prater, which is in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. So Philadelphia area.
You mentioned that there are other drugs similar to Ozempic. Do they have the same issues? Do they have the same issues?
Mostly, yes. So in these cases, the main issue isn't necessarily the side effects or the risks, but it's whether they warned about them or not. Because if you know of potential risk, but you're warning about it, then you've done your duty as the manufacturer to properly communicate issues that could happen. But to answer your question more concisely, yes, for the most part, you're seeing the same injuries with the different types of GLP-1 medications.
Are you reviewing those cases as well?
Yes. So just to throw out a few more names for drugs that we are looking at, and these are all again GLP-1 medications, is Ozempic, Wegovy. That one is approved for weight loss, but we are still investigating those. Ribelsis, which is basically the pill form of Ozempic. Trulicity, Mounjaro, which is manufactured by Eli Lilly, and Zepbound. Zepbound is very new. It was recently approved. It is also an Eli Lilly drug, and that one is approved specifically for weight loss.
What actions should a listener take if he or she thinks that they've been harmed by Ozempic or a similar medication?
Sure. I mean, I think I'm a little biased when I say definitely contact a lawyer, and just get a feel of, whether or not they have a viable cause of action. Especially if the client is in our great state of Alabama, there's in any state, there's a limited amount of time that you have to file one of these lawsuits. And in Alabama, it's pretty severe. It's basically when you get the first symptom, you need to be thinking, lawsuit minded, which is usually not anyone's focus when they're getting sick. Their primary focus is getting better, but the law kind of is what it is in Alabama. So I would just suggest, contact a lawyer, get a feel of whether or not there's an actionable claim. And it may come down to, and we've seen a lot of these, is that there may be some minor injuries, like maybe they were admitted one time for maybe cyclical vomiting. That's something we would still want to investigate, certainly. But it may not be the best fileable case at this time, just based on the limited amount of medical expenses and other expenses that may be involved.
Mary Kim, if our listeners have additional questions, how can they reach you?
Sure, and I welcome anyone to reach out anytime. So my email is going to be my first name dot my last name at beasleyallen.com. That's Mary, Mary, Raybon, Rayb as in Bravo, ON at beasleyallen.com. Or they can feel free to call my direct line. My direct line is area code 334-495-1668. And I'd be glad to discuss it.
Well, Mary Kim, I certainly appreciate your time today, and I would just encourage, anyone that's having issues after taking one of these drugs is like you said, to contact an attorney. So thank you again.
Thank you.